real conversations, and some hard truths. Welcome to The Quiet Professional.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. This is the third installment of my series with the Edmonton Police Service. I got an exciting episode today and an exciting guest. So look who's in the room with me, Chief Driechel.
Hey Nathan, how are you?
Good. And congratulations on the new position.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Excited to get you in here right at the start of your term.
Yeah, you bet.
I think it's going to be an exciting time and people are hopeful. So, no, I wanted to start off just a little bit talking about you.
Sure.
And if we could kind of just go back to where it started for you, if you could highlight some parts of your career and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, you bet. So, name's Warren Driechel. I'm a 28-year member of the Edmonton Police Service. I joined in 1997. I was part of recruit class 88. I was born and raised in the Edmonton area. Didn't live directly in Edmonton, but I grew up in a rural area south of Edmonton. I would suggest it was probably my later high school years I started to think about policing as a career. It actually probably started, I actually remember the day we had one of the RCMP constables come to the detachment, talk to us about Safe Grad, the DARE program, and I was kind of intrigued by policing at that time because it was one of those moments when I realized there's a career that has something different every day. Here you have a police officer that's coming to talk to kids in high school, but also probably doing police things, right? And I was just very intrigued with it. Prior to joining this job, I became an auxiliary with the RCMP, and I was an auxiliary for about 5 years. Gave me some really great exposure to actually doing kind of the work of what a police officer is and seeing that. And it was both in two communities, one north of Edmonton, one south of Edmonton, so very different kind of roles. But again, I think that really drove me to look at policing as a career. You got to realize this is back probably in the early 90s. There wasn't a lot of police services were hiring people at the time. So, it was like getting that foot in the door through those kind of, opportunities was kind of how I saw me moving to a career in law enforcement. I was also a victim services advocate. When I coming to Edmonton, I became a community station volunteer. So I, tried to get different exposure to what policing was all about.
Sound like you're very geared toward this career.
Yeah, it was, I had to kind of inform myself, what is policing about? I mean, it's easy to watch movies and TV and think you know what policing is, but actually seeing it firsthand was really important.
Did you have any family at this time that were police or any sort of exposure to it?
My dad was a military reservist. He'd spent some time in the military when he was younger. I think he installed in me kind of a sense of service, community. He actually put me in Sea Cadets when I was a bit younger, so learned how to march and wear a uniform, and that idea of discipline in something was really important. It's kind of funny, my brother as well and ended up going into the Coast Guard, right? Oh. So again, we have a picture, unfortunately my dad's passed away since, but we have a picture with all three of us in kind of our dress uniforms at one point, and it's kind of special to think about like that legacy piece of what, drives us to do something. I do a bit of a lecture to youth on that, that have an interest in policing, and I usually talk about my dad as being an inspiration for me, and I actually put his picture up on the screen. He was given the Order of Military Merit in 2000. He actually took me to the ceremony. Right?
Wow.
So again, I think it was just that kind of influenced me early on about that idea of community service, serving your community, giving back, but also just is that idea of like not sitting in an office every day and having something different in front of me. So like I said, 1997, I was hired by the Edmonton Police Service, started training. Goes by really quick. As long as those training days seem, suddenly you find yourself on the street. And, I really gravitated to that frontline policing. Loved being a patrol officer, putting on the uniform every day, going out, worked in North Division, spent about four and a half years in patrol, transferred to a different division, south side of Edmonton, and then I became a beat cop on White Ave. Okay. And that was actually, again, when I go back to my learning about policing or that exploration of policing, I was actually a community station volunteer at Old Strathcona Station.
Okay, so just south of White Ave?
Yeah. And, of course, going to university or college in the city, White Ave was a big hangout, and I always thought it'd be great to be a beat cop on White Ave. So it was probably in the early 2000s after the riot. There, the Canada Day riot, as it's known, I became a beat cop on White Ave and spent 3.5 years there. Then I left the street for a while. I moved inside and went into recruit training as an instructor. Probably for me, one of the most rewarding jobs I've done on the job. was, going back to that kind of teaching environment. It came at a point in my career at about 8 years on the street, in that patrol and beat function. And it just reinvigorated me because you're surrounded by all these new people that want to be cops. And one thing I often say is I'm humbled, when I'm around people that want to be police officers.
Yeah.
And reflect what drove me to becoming a cop, right?
That's one of those things, like when I go back and I think of doing the PTO side of the house, and now even just mentoring people. And it is rewarding, but it also is good because you get back to some of the basics.
Yeah.
And you see some of the things that you were missing out. You go 8 years without doing a certain thing, certain tasks, and then, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do that. So yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, when you mature as a police officer on the job, right? You have expectations of what policing's about. You think it's one thing. You start to see other sides of it. And not that it's negative, but it is easy to become a little bit disenfranchised or disenchanted at that point in your career. So going inside and teaching recruits for me was like, it really reinvigorated me. And I look back, there's still today recruits that I trained, so this is like 20 years ago, that still reach out to me, ask me questions. As a matter of fact, one of the classes just this past weekend had their 20-year kind of anniversary. Okay. And they invited me. I couldn't make it, unfortunately, because I had another event. But if I hadn't, I would have been there for sure, right? Because you get to actually have a hand in shaping someone's career as a police officer. Yeah. Like you said, as a PTO or in that recruit training. And I think it's a real honor and privilege to be able to do that, you know. From there, I was promoted to sergeant. I was put into what was known at the time the Intelligence Analysis Unit. So didn't know what that was. I'd never even heard of it. But it was basically in charge of our crime analysis unit. So it's a totally different view of the organization, and primarily a all-civilian unit for the most part. There were a couple sworn members in it at the time, but it just gave me a different perspective that this is a bigger organization than you know. There's things in behind closed doors and in dark rooms you don't know about, and just gave me just a different perspective of what the organization can do, and it started to get me into that world of data and intelligence and how do we make decisions in the organization. And again, I learned a lot. I think it actually framed a lot of my career from there. Just understanding, again, there's a bigger picture in the organization and things, how, like the different gears and mechanisms of working behind the scene. And learned a ton, and it was a great experience also leading a civilian team. I think that we as police officers don't appreciate, it's not just cops on this job, there's a lot of civilians, and everybody's got a role to play. And for a lot of times, the civilian employees of our organization, they're just intrinsically motivated to serve, but don't want to be cops.
Well, I think there was a stat once I heard that it's something like 6 to 7 people behind the scenes that make a cop functional. Yep. You think of all the searches you have to do and all the different databases you have to access. Totally. Who's doing all those tasks for you? Yeah, that is certainly. Well,
it's like the military. Everybody thinks of the military, it's your frontline soldier, but behind the scenes, there's people driving trucks, cooking food, putting uniforms together, right? And that's how an organization moves today, and especially in a modern world, right? Again, flash forwarding, I then went to work in a joint forces operation with the RCMP and Canadian Border Services, what at the time was known as the Edmonton Intelligence or Integrated Intelligence Unit, kind of the precursor to what today is ALERT, the provincial model. And again, that was my first foray into being a team commander on some very complex organized crime investigations. And again, just seeing how things work differently, right? You're not just going to a call for service, you're putting a project together to deal with something. Went to work in our EDGE unit, which is our Edmonton Drug and Gang Enforcement Unit, and then from there made the decision to go back to patrol. So went back as a watch commander out to one of our patrol divisions. So this was an interesting story, is that I'd been out of uniform for off the street for almost 8 years at that point.
Between the, what was it, EDGE and...
Yeah, and of course EDGE and EIU and Intelligence Analysis Unit, I'd been out of really kind of frontline policing role. And there was two things that really I learned. Is one thing I'd heard while you're on the inside is how tough patrol is, or how bad things were getting, right? And then what I actually learned is how good they were, right? Yeah. The cops on the street, when I went back as a watch commander, were better than we ever were. Like, they're educated, hardworking, had a different perspective of the world, right? But then I also learned that policing had changed in that time. It was more intense, there was a lot more needs, more complexity in investigations, right?
We're called on to do a lot more.
Yeah, so that was great. Loved that job as well. From there, Went inside to do our basically intelligence review, so kind of did a review of how we build our intelligence processes. Got my promotion to inspector, stayed there for a bit, and then from there it was quite quick. I moved from being in that intelligence role to being the acting superintendent of our infrastructure technology division. So technology,
Yeah.
and again, great experience, totally different view of the world. Different view of policing. Learned a lot, again, about how things work. Some really big budgeting exercises in there, like the cost of technology in policing is huge. And really tried to work to modernize the organization. And what was also interesting, and there was an intersection at the time running IT, was the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
Right? So if you look at any organization, like there was such demand on technology areas in big organizations to get people working remote. How do we do things differently? And so there was a lot of really big projects that came out of that area about how we built up our network, got people working remote. We actually started a virtual investigations team at that time, so it was like really scaling up that technology to kind of address how the world was changing.
I don't think a lot of people realize that how much goes on behind the scenes with all these different units and just the scale of it.
Yeah.
Then, like you were saying, to earlier in your career when you first got off the street, you are after beats, and you start to kind of get that vision of how everything kind of works together.
Yep.
And it's the bigger picture, and that's something I'm trying to teach the patrol, the frontline people about nowadays.
Yep.
Is just how much actually goes on behind the scenes. So
And it's, I think people can't appreciate, like they just jump in their patrol car, they turn on the computer, go to the call.
Yeah.
Right? But behind their scenes, there's like dispatch systems working, and then there's like networking systems working, and there's security and cyber systems working, and ensuring that those systems, especially those mission critical systems, are up and running all the time. You got your radio systems, right? That all works on technology, and even the cars today, right? When you look at the cars, like just the integration of the different systems in cars, and so there's nothing that technology doesn't touch.
Yeah.
We've had instances, to your point, like when we've had outages, like we somehow make it work, but it's like I always laugh. It's like if my kids today, if like suddenly something happened and like the internet quit and phones quit working, they will not know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? So we've become very dependent on these things working behind the scenes, and it's like, when you look at the cost of policing and you look at the requirements of policing, those are necessary functions that have to exist. It's just finding the balance between how do you still invest in that and keep the organization running at say for instance this technical level, but still support your frontline policing, because it really becomes your bread and butter, right? So you're balancing the needs of the public but the needs of the organization with those conversations.
So maybe when you look back at your career, you started kind of a operational side of things, and then you went a little more investigative, and then now you're into the administration of it. Are you more impartial to any one of those kind of your favorite that you worked in?
My heart still sits with the frontline operations, right? Investigations were good, learned a lot, but I can tell you, like, what gets me going, what always got me going, it's just like an image in my mind that I have of, like, you start your shift, you're walking out to your patrol car, it's like an August afternoon in the city of Edmonton, it's hot, there's a buzz and electric in the air, the radio's going, and it just even gives me goosebumps to say it, but it's just like, what's ahead of you for that shift. Right?
Yeah.
I joined to be a uniform member. I loved putting on the uniform. I got out of my comfort zone, obviously, in some places. But I think the important thing was, and I hear this often, is that we talk about rounding people out. You can gain whatever experience you want in whatever role you're in. It's how you embrace that. What do you take away from it, and what do you learn? Right?
Yeah, I would say it's like how you engage with that job specifically, and you can always touch on those other areas. So even in patrol, you can be very good at investigations. You can be very good at intelligence and still do the patrol function.
Totally. Ask questions, explore those different things that make up policing and the role you're in, right? Really dig in. I found that in every role that I've had, whether it's in an operational, investigative, or like an administrative role, is like kind of assess the culture, look for efficiencies have always been my thing. Like, I worked in marketing before I was in policing and built like business plans, but it was always around efficiency and profit driven.
Yeah.
We don't work that way. Like we don't get measured on whether we make money or not in policing, but the idea of efficiency still exists, right? And so I kind of bring that lens as well, as like, what do we do more efficiently to really, meet the needs of what is a growing city, right?
Okay. Well, maybe that's a good segue into talking about applying for chief.
Yeah.
Because I want to get your mindset on this, like how you thought about the position when you started applying. What kind of advice did you have? Did you have to put yourself in a certain mindset in the sense that now you're going to be in demand? Everybody wants to talk to you, the community, businesses. So how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? And it's something I struggled with, I think the minute I started to move into those executive ranks as an inspector, superintendent, I start to the inner battle of how far do you go? How far do you push yourself? What do you want to do? You get on a bit of a stream or a promotion process stream, and that's a possibility. But I always try to focus on the task at hand, develop myself in those roles, and then almost kind of push that decision down the road, right until you're faced with it. When the opportunity for deputy chief came up, I struggled with the idea, because knowing once you go there, the next step could be chief. Right? So you need to start preparing then. It doesn't just happen when the chief position comes. You need to start preparing earlier and think about, what are you willing to take on? What are you willing to give up? Right? And what is your motivation for doing that job? And I think for me, there was a couple things. One was, I've been critical of the organization at times of certain things. I've proposed change. I do see myself as a change agent, and that's what really motivates me. And then recognizing throughout my career, every time I got promoted, I could affect more change.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and then embracing that idea. I recognize too, again, talking a bit about my history, some of my exposure. At every level, when I think of those efficiencies, whether you're a patrol constable and you're looking around, it's very easy to become critical of the things that you feel need to be improved around you. But as you move up through the ranks, I never lost that perspective. So then I started to think, as the chief, ultimately, you've got the final say. I don't mean it in an ego-driven or arrogant way, but it's if I have a vision for how this organization can function, it can be better. This ultimately, I have the ability to do it.
Well, I think a large part of that is you have the ability to put somebody there that, not that you have to be hands-on with every single decision, but you have the ability to put somebody there that you feel is qualified, that can do the job.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and you build your team. You set that vision for the organization. You hold people accountable to that, I think, is important. The other part of your question is, how do you start to prepare? I think for me, and I've said this, and I don't say it in a negative way, but it's you just have to start to become comfortable becoming uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That those demands, not just the extracurricular, all the events on the weekends and nights. It's being there, but being present in those events. So being prepared to speak for the organization, being prepared to stand up for the organization, right? And make those decisions and live by them. I think that's something you have to learn and be prepared to do in that role, to be an effective leader, whether it's wherever you sit in the organization and ultimately as the chief. I was fortunate enough to have some exposure through Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, through some mentorship programs.
Okay.
Being able to lean on some of those people and ask those questions. Ask who did I draw on? It's not just look at them and sit with them and watch them do the job, but ask them what is the most challenging thing you deal with? What is it that keeps you awake at night? What are the things that you had to do to prepare yourself, right? And then again, inform myself of what I could be faced with in this role.
There's always a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
But if you can kind of make it tangible before you get there, and then at least you have some way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Prepare.
And I think we all bring a different perspective when that happens. For me, it wasn't just another promotion. I think this is the one that felt different, right? In other ones, you get promoted in the organization, and now suddenly you go from constable, sergeant, detective, but you kind of just move through the organization, right? And you take a little more on.
Yeah.
This one it's different. You're oh wow, if there's nobody else. There is, you got a team, but if I break something, I can't go up the chain and ask somebody to fix it.
Yeah.
Right. So you recognize that that this step it's a big one. There's a lot of responsibility, and the other perspective I gained was you suddenly become a thing, if that makes sense. You become a position in a bigger environment, a city, a community, rather than just you as a person.
Well, it's like I was saying, it's you become in demand, so it's not, I guess, I don't know if you call it being a celebrity, but people want to reach out, they want you to come to these events. Now everybody kind of wants their piece, their airtime with you. You have to prepare for that. One of the things I was going to ask too on that is family. So What about your family? How do you kind of make this a reality for them? How do you explain it to them?
Yeah, I think there was some very important discussions with my family. I've got 2 adult daughters. My wife, actually, we got married when I was in recruit class. We were engaged when I got hired, so we didn't change that. We kept going. But they've been along for that journey the whole time. They've been there for the good times. They've been there for the bad times, right? And, you start to have those discussions about, becoming that thing now than a person. Right? Not everyone's going to love you all the time, so there's going to be criticism, there's going to be commentary, right? And then just making sure that they understand it's not necessarily about the person, it's about the role. The other thing is, I hate to say it's a world of like personal protection now. It's like make them aware that they have the same last name, so how do they monitor and manage themselves accordingly to that?
Yeah.
And so it's bringing them along for that ride, and I think. I've said this, and I said this we had a recruit class grad here this past week, and it's like family is so important in this role, right? They become a sounding board, they become that safe place when you leave the job. You never truly leave it, but at the same time, they are part of it, and this was a big step, so they understood that. Thankfully, everyone's very supportive, and so far, supportive of the move. I manage myself accordingly to make sure that, when I have my Grumpy Tuesday, I go home and I don't have Grumpy Tuesday night, right? And, I think just appreciating that it's not just you, your family's along for this ride is really important. So.
That's one of the things I always tell, especially the more junior members, but even some of the peers I've had chats with, and it's, you have to have your home life in order to do this job, because this job is tough. Home is tough too. Sometimes coming in here feels like a break. But if your home life is in order, that makes you a lot more stable here. You're able to focus on everybody that you need to focus on, community and internal.
Absolutely, and I mean, we really focus on that wellness piece now and resilience. It's so important, right? And I learned early on in my career, just through some missteps and through other things, you don't put the job at number one all the time, right? That you need to prioritize it when you need to, and you need to find that balance in your life, and I think that's really important. And I think that it's very easy to get caught up in the whole whirlwind of your job, and it becomes all-encompassing everything. It's not the most important thing in your life.
Yeah. One of the insights I was hoping you could give us is when you first are told that you're the chief, what does the first week, what do the first couple weeks look like?
Yeah.
Does somebody hand you a template and say, these are, out of all the things you have to do, here's the first 10 steps you have to at least get done? Like, is there any blueprint?
There, very little, right? Because the organization doesn't want to pause to let you just step in the role and give you the break you need, because something could happen the next day or the day before that you just need to pick up the ball and run with. I think for me, it was kind of set that vision, right? So first thing I did was get the leadership team in a room and just talk about, what we're doing. Thankfully, and it's a unique perspective, I'm from the inside the organization, right? So I already have the relationships. I know the organization, I know the community in the city, what it needs. I've worked very hard towards, achieving some public safety goals in the city. So it was very easy to sit down with credibility with that leadership team and say, this is what we're doing, right? And also I had a unique perspective of being an interim chief for a role. So you could kind of open the door the next day and still do the job.
Yeah, you hit the ground running.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that was it, was start to really be very prescriptive, very descriptive about the mission and vision and what we want to do as an organization, and make sure that it was right up front and clarify those things. It was also, for me, one of the things was stabilizing the leadership team in this organization. We've got a lot of vacancies, we're in the middle of a promotion process. Knowing that, we need to do some things, it's like really building that leadership team up to be successful. So those are a real focus for us. To your point, there's no template. There really isn't, So exactly like you said, the things that, I did to prepare, the people that I lean on, mentors that I see, or saw, was draw on them to say, what can I expect? What are the things I need to do? And, really start to map out in my head and then on paper, what does the next 100 days look like?
Are you recording all this for the next person down the road? Like, maybe
no, they're on their own, man. No, it's a great question.
It might be something interesting to look back on, 5 years or so from now and say, hey, here's all the things I thought.
Here's the transition binder, right? Yeah, no, it's a great point. something to reflect on. And I think one of my goals is really try to really get those next leaders developed to be the next chief. You know, I'm not saying that didn't happen with us, but things move so quickly, and the last couple of years were very busy. It was like you sink or swim, make it or don't make it, right? And then hopefully you're ready to step into the role. And I think there was some mentorship that went on, there was some development throughout those phases, but I think we could be more intentional about it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you let people know how busy is your day? Like, when do you start? I know you're on the phone, like, you could be called at any time, but what does your schedule actually look like? Are you starting at 5 a.m. going till 9 p.m.? Or?
Today is a 5 to 7 day, right? So try to get into the gym early, because I know that as the day runs on, I'm not going to get time. And I think that for me, maintaining that health and fitness is really important. Just for sanity's sake, but also just to, feel good about yourself and that confidence as you go through the day and staying healthy. But yeah, it's a packed day, right? And there's tons of discussions going on about leadership development, about budgets all the time. Tonight we have what's called Chiefs Community Council, so leaders from across different cultural groups and communities across the city. We meet with them every couple months, so that happens tonight. And your question is a good one. It's busy. What I find that I have to do is kind of manage that sense of urgency around how busy I am. And something I learned early on, it's very easy when you're in these roles, executive roles, to like pick up your phone right away and deal with something, or send an email right away.
Yeah.
It just cascades into urgency all the way down. So one of the things I'm trying to find is that balance of what is a real priority, not letting things fall off the table, because there will be today, for me, 100 emails and 20 different text messages, is work to manage that, right, as an inbox exercise. There was a great book, it's actually by Cotter, it's called Sense of Urgency. It's one of the best books I read about just by me saying in a group meeting to a group of leaders, saying, hey, we should do something. Suddenly it's like, the chief wants this, the chief needs this, drop everything. By the time it gets to the bottom, it's drop everything, the chief wants this right now.
Yeah.
It's not how that conversation goes. So I try to focus on things like prioritizing those conversations. Even though I'm busy, I need my team to work, and I don't want to be a distraction to them. I'm a big believer in, I use delay send on my emails, so generally at 7 o'clock in the morning, people will get a bunch of emails from me, even though at night I'm dealing with them, because I want them to be effective leaders, and I want them to not be spurned on by the urgency that my job creates. So it's a question, it's something that I've learned just by watching other leaders, right?
Well, I guess if you get an email or you get a text message and then you reply right away, they reply right away, now you're kind of trickling down that you're spiraling down that
Absolutely.
path.
Yeah. And it's something I try to install in the team. It's like, there is urgency in our job. There is importance, right? But I would maintain something on a budget number. That can wait till tomorrow or Monday, right? And we're very much, because we're all so busy, we want to clear our inboxes right away, and we go through this process of like, if I can get rid of it as quick as I can, it's off my plate. But that can cascade down into some real urgency right to the bottom of the organization, and people react funny to that.
Well, there's just always something else. Something else will come in. Doesn't matter how fast you get rid of other things. Yeah,
and I maintain that outside of like something that's a super risk to the public or to a member's safety, right, we can manage urgency a little bit better, right? So, but your point, it's busy, and it's another thing you need to prepare for. Like, you need to know you're going to give up weekends, nights, right? And I try to approach it with an attitude of like, hey, maybe I can learn something for this. Maybe it's going to be fun. Try to go in with a smile on your face, right? Even though you're tired. And I think part of it is the organization needs that, but the community expects it from the chief to be present at some of these events, right?
Yeah, and I mean, that's the second time you've mentioned that. So obviously, I think that's a very important part of what you're doing. I mean, you have so many people that want to speak with you and kind of tell you what their issues might be, or they need help with something. So to be engaged constantly from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., I mean, those are long days.
They are. One thing I think too that's important now is build a team around you to help you, right? So, I've kind of created a chief of staff position, and kind of a position now to kind of deal with police operations in the city, because otherwise I would have 12 direct reports. So in amongst all those things that are coming in, I've got 12 people to manage. What I'm trying to do is compartmentalize a couple things so I can free myself up a little more to be a strategic leader and not a reactive leader. And so building up that team around, so when all those requests come in, they're managing it, they're looking at it and prioritizing the importance of it.
Okay. So I want to turn to the organization. You kind of mentioned some of the new stuff that you're looking at creating. I always kind of saw your job as looking more up and out.
Yep.
So you're dealing with all the community, there's all the politicking, you have City Hall. So is that why you have the position that LaForce is in? So that would be the Chief of Operations?
Yep.
And he can kind of take on the stuff that's more directly within the organization?
Yep. Yeah, so that he can align the efforts of the three kind of primary police operations bureaus into focused approach to crime. We're very effective around crime, but very reactive.
Yeah.
But there's certain things when we look at the disorder downtown, the extortion files in the Southeast Asian community. We approach them very much in siloed approaches, unfortunately, right? So it's like, how do you align those three bureaus, whether it's patrol, investigations, or community safety, towards a common cause?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just pick up little pieces of it. If I had to do that as a chief, I'd probably spend a lot of my time with those three bureaus trying to orientate them, right? But now he can do that, so it frees me up, and I now have one point of contact to go to about police operations. It's so far been pretty effective because I can step back, I can be aware, but I don't need to be involved, right?
Yeah.
At the level that I should have been.
You're using your brain power on this one thing, and again, it speaks to like you're going to burn yourself out if you're doing everybody's job or all these jobs.
That's right. And it's a big city. Edmonton, population and area-wise, is growing quite quickly. It's not lost on me, we are not growing at the same pace, right? So how do we become a little more efficient is really a big conversation. There's not buckets of money, there's not a ton of new bodies coming in. We will grow as we can, but it's like creating those efficiencies in that police response model is going to be really important. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was asked but on that, would it be more leveraging technology and then also the intelligence side?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the intelligence side first would be, where do we need our cops in our communities are being affected? So using data and saying we've got a problem coming up in this, whether it's crime, whether it's disorder, making sure our cops are present in that community, so being more proactive versus reactive. And we became a very reactive organization. Most police organizations did. So it's just pivoting that intelligence-led kind of policing thing. We got some work to do because it's kind of we moved away from that, and I think there's a lot of systems that need to be built up. The other perspective, is bringing in kind of a customer service lens, right? So managing crime and stuff like that, but also that customer service, it's like we normalized in some cases it takes 3 days to get to a call because we're so busy, right? So could we leverage technology, maybe do some of those things more virtual? So imagine like a break and enter call right now. Traditionally, we have to send a police officer to that event, but if there are other priorities, they're not getting there right away, right? Depending on what's going on at the time. So could we now use technology to get that reporter, that complainant to report that break and enter on an online report?
Yeah.
And then could we do a virtual investigation? So getting that all done up front, then we can determine whether we actually send a cop or not, or maybe we just send our ident team, right? And so it's like looking at those different models of how we modernize that for a growing city.
Yeah.
If we just download it all on the boots on the street, the physical police officers, we will become less effective, right? So it's looking at those things. The other thing I think with, you talk about technology, is engaging new tools to get the public sentiment on public safety. It's very easy to look at crime data, right? And it may only tell part of the story, but we know there's unreported crime in our communities. People don't report it because maybe the systems that we have right now are clunky, or they don't feel the police can be effective. You start to now get out to the community and ask them, how do you actually feel in your community? Are you feel safe or not? So we're doing more with the technology around that and getting that real-time public sentiment.
Well, they'll tell you at ground level things that they didn't report for whatever reason, but when you go there in person, they'll tell you something different. I'm super critical of data because I know two people can look at the same stat and have a totally different interpretation of it. So it makes it difficult to just strictly go based on numbers.
Yeah. And we hang a lot of our hats on that.
One of the things I wanted to ask, just because we've maybe about 5 minutes left, obviously organized crime and dealing with some of the geopolitics out there is near and dear to things that I'm interested in. So I wanted to get your thoughts on leveraging intelligence and how we do things with the big picture. So do we have any plans for tackling things like organized crime? I know people ask a lot of questions. Our cartel in Canada, What are we doing around that side of the house?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, we become very reactive and very siloed in our approach. And, we'll get a piece of information about organized crime, we run out and try to deal with it. I don't think there's much of a coordinated impact on that. So I think when we talk about organized crime, it's starting to build up that intelligence model. When you look at intelligence, there's crime analysis, there's strategic intelligence, but there's criminal intelligence, right? And it's like really building a criminal intelligence model to say, what are the biggest risks and threat in our community? And frankly, I don't know we have the best picture of that right now. And not to say, go out and we're just gonna give up the streets. It's like, we really have to get a grasp on that. Then our response can be very varied and different things. We may look at, around organized crime, a very disruption strategy of investigation, getting into that group, dismantling that organization, but it's knowing what is the biggest risk and threat at the time.
Yeah.
The challenge with intelligence has been is that when we use our own data, it's very backwards looking. It's because we've already done things. So when we assess risk in our community, sometimes we've done a lot of work and they're not a risk anymore. But because of the data, as you said, they come out as the highest priority. So it's getting out and really starting to say, what are those risks and threats, doing a proper analysis, and then coming up with a strategy. The disruption piece is one, maybe suppression is another. We know that in our downtown core that around certain days when the different support monies come out, the gangs are very active in dealing drugs.
Yeah.
Right? So now we can suppress that activity if we know that, and we can use the data to target it and get out and be on top of those drug dealers and those that are, victimizing that part of the population. So it's just really getting in there and being intentional with it and less reactive.
I think that we need looking at a systems approach. So you want to not only take down the people who are out there on the streets doing the drug dealing themselves, but you want to go both directions on that chain, and you want to stop it right from the head of the snake.
Absolutely.
And obviously we have a lot of partners we can leverage. So there's a lot of different directions, what I'm saying, we can go with that.
Yeah, the challenge is always going to be that everyone's so busy. You focus on the problem, you get very myopic, and you look at what's right in front of you today, right? And I've always said is like, if we looked at the city, it's a big city, we could say take 80% of our time and be reactive to that organized crime activity. But you could take 20 and be very strategic and say, how do we go after the most insulated, most complex targets, individuals, whatever it is, to try to do that. It takes a lot longer, much more concerted effort, but if you start to break it down and say we'll be focused, you can be impactful, for sure.
Do you think, and this would be last question here, do you think we can educate the public better on things such as this? Because they see what they see out there, but a large part of what seems to be missing in media nowadays is the connection to those bigger chains of things. How does stuff get from Mexico or China into our system, down into the street level? Is there something we could do as a police service to educate the public?
Yeah, we probably could do more, and I think part of it is being, again, communicating that we know this is an issue. It's got to be intelligence driven, and we need to know what we can say. I think the other thing is demonstrate through activities when we start to go after the head of the snake, as you said, really talk about those impacts to the community. The challenge is always going to be, as the public sees, like us, what's right in front of them. So it's the disorder or the crime, or they come out and find that someone's broken into their vehicle, right? And that seems to be their biggest concern of the moment, right? Yeah. And we hear that quite a bit from the public. The biggest things that come out in our public engagement surveys are traffic, right? And that property crime that's occurring in their neighborhood. Now, notwithstanding, when you look at the whole chain, motivators for crime are often driven sometimes in the back end at some level by organized crime, whether it's the drugs or whatever it's going on, right? And so I think it's just people understanding that it's not just one issue that a city faces, that there are some very big drivers of crime. And to your point, it's like leveraging those partners in that work is really important. We look at with the Southeast Asian investigation, we know that the one group has been now categorized as a terrorist organization. So what changes? So leveraging our federal partners in those conversations, what other tools can we employ, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think around that it was, once they're named one of the FTOs, what does that actually mean? So they get named as terrorist organization, but what does that mean? What does that look like for policing? What does it look like for politics? And who's doing what about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, at a ground level, it doesn't change much, because I think a lot of the activity we're going to investigate and suppress, but it's that more strategic level of now what other tools can we employ in seizing assets, locking up assets, right? Or extraditing or dealing with people that are involved in those groups. And it just gives you a little more leverage. It adds more powers. That starts to also devolve or creates more complex investigations, which cost more time, which costs more money, right? Yeah. And so it's just really understanding that, and what do you hope to achieve? I think when you look at some of the complexity of organized crime that we're seeing, this is not a snapshot in time, this is not a one-off, this is the new way of things, right? Technology gives criminals more opportunity. They're not constrained by the same legislations and powers, and
yeah, they got no rules.
That's right. And I think that is one of the biggest risks that I think that police organizations face today, is the growing complexity of crime, and our inability, and I don't know if that's the proper word, is to really keep pace with that, right? So it's always trying to evolve, look at different ways to manage those problems and get at them. And then when you have, that you have a group that's designated as, terrorist organization, it gives you different opportunities that maybe you couldn't consider before.
Yeah. Well, we're just at the end of our time. I'm going to have to check in like a year or so and see how we're doing. Yeah. So we'll have to do this again, and then maybe 5 years down the road, we'll... Yeah. Yeah, no, I want to say thank you for being on here.
You bet.